resident artist at Chroma Inc., and I'm here today in Chroma Studios to talk about Atelier Interactive Professional Artist Acrylics. Interactive is the most innovative and versatile fine arts acrylic available on the market today. It allows artists the ability to control their open time, whether they want to use the traditional wet over dry acrylic painting techniques or explore the new wet on wet acrylic painting techniques. Let me explain. Conventional acrylics dry fast. So these are the type of acrylics that we're most familiar with. Artists using conventional acrylic painting techniques will use wet over dry, scumbling, and glazing. You can certainly do this style of painting with interactive because it sets up like any other acrylic. But interactive's not just any other acrylic because it was also designed to be blendable over time. So now artists can have wet and wet sessions the entire time, even days later. They can develop the nuances that only wet and soft blending can bring. With interactive, you can paint the way that you want to, when you want to. Its unique formulation allows artists to have access to those dual styles of painting with just one tube of paint. Now, some acrylics on the market stay wet for long periods of time, while other paint companies produce a spray that you can use on your palette to keep that wet. With some brands of acrylics, you need to add lots of retarders to slow down their drying time, while with other brands of acrylics, you need to mix a conventional acrylic with a new acrylic so that it will dry faster, but not with interactive. With interactive, it will do it all and more, again, with just one tube of paint. So how does interactive work? Well, interactive cures over time. As it cures, it becomes what we call touch dry. At this touch dry stage, you can use all of your wet over dry painting techniques. But this touch dry stage also permits you to work in a way that has never been available to acrylic painters before, wet in wet. So to get those subtle nuances, all you need to do is use your water sprayer to bring your painting back to that wet, juicy stage. You cannot do this with any other acrylic. This is the only acrylic that lets you work both ways, wet over dry and wet and wet. Let me illustrate. I created this painting with interactive using traditional wet over dry acrylic painting techniques. I want you to note the scumbling and the glazing and the hard edges. These hard edges happen because acrylics set up so quickly. That's one of the great things about them. Paintings like this are developed layer upon layer using these wet over dry painting techniques, and that's what gives them this depth. This style of painting, this interactive wet over dry, can be very successful, as the following works will illustrate. These paintings have the hallmarks of this wet over dry style. They have defined edges, and artists use different techniques to help them integrate these edges and smooth transitions to create a unified painting. Artists use glazing techniques, painting transparent layers of color on top of touch-dry paint to alter the cast of the colors. Glazing tends to give works a luminous quality because you see through paint layers. Some paintings can have 30 or more layers of glaze. Colors are combined optically, not physically. Scumbling is another technique where thin layers of wet paint are dragged with a dry brush over dry paint and the underlayer still peeks through. This produces a feathery, textural effect and is particularly nice in foliage, clouds, and abstract paintings. Typically, artists use opaque light colors over dark colors, but some artists scumble dark colors over light. Now let me show you how to develop a painting using the new wet and wet techniques. I started this painting earlier today, let it become touch dry, and then transported it back here to the Chroma Studios. Now, if I had started this painting with, let's say, oils or maybe one of those new acrylics that stayed wet for a long period of time, I'd never be able to transport this easily without possibly ruining the painting or getting paint all over myself or all over my car. But how do you actually do wet on wet? Well, as you're painting, when you feel your brush start to drag, you just use your water sprayer to bring that paint back to that wet stage, and then you're actually able to blend your colors as opposed to just overpaint. Working wet on wet like this allows me to develop these subtle transitions and really add a nuance that you don't typically find with acrylic paintings. By just using my water sprayer, I'm able to keep my painting wet for a normal painting session. Now, if I wanted to work wet on wet later today or over the next few days, that's when I'd want to use the unlocking formula. Wet and wet blending has been around for centuries with oil painting, but it's been next to impossible to do with a conventional acrylic. But it's easy to do these techniques with interactive, as the following paintings will show. These paintings illustrate what can be achieved when you work wet paint into wet paint. There are lots of disappearing edges that merge the foreground into the background and sometimes blur the distinction between the two. Paintings done in this wet and wet style tend to be described as soft or painterly. Because colors are blended, they have an integrated quality instead of a layered quality. Instead of colors mixing optically, artists physically combine them on their surface. If artists blend too much and colors get muddy, they simply use a rag to wipe away or remove the paint the way that oil painters do. Working wet and wet lets artists address and resolve their paintings in an entirely new fashion. With interactive, there is always time to complete an idea in wet paint if you want to. Because interactive is a universal paint, artists can combine their conventional wet over dry painting techniques with these new wet and wet painting techniques to create a style that is uniquely their own, one that expresses their own individual voice and vision. With just one brand of paint, interactive, artists can take acrylic paintings further.